Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. Happy Tuesday. Lindsay, how are you doing?
It is a happy Tuesday. I'm excited to hear what you want to talk about. I know it's probably not the Met Gala, which is what I was watching all night last night.
Oh, really? Was that on again?
Yeah, that thing was on.
I saw some photos on X and all that sort of thing.
I'm sure you loved all the looks, but
was there a theme this year?
Yeah, it was copying off the dandy culture. Mind you, I'm not the fashion.
Dandy culture?
I don't even know
what that means.
Going on a rant, it's going to be too long to explain. Please, you tell me what's on your radar. Maybe we'll get to that later.
Okay, maybe we'll circle back. Anyway, the 2025 Pulitzer Prizes were awarded yesterday, with several mainstream news outlets winning multiple awards for their journalism. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post were among the big winners. Now look, despite my criticisms of the mainstream media, it is true that mainstream liberal and progressive journalists often do good work. For instance, one of the New York Times winning articles was an in-depth look at how the U.S. government's support for torturers and murderers in Afghanistan helped make the civilian population more favorably disposed toward the Taliban, undermining the U.S.'s diplomatic position. That was great reporting, and it's true, and the Times deserves credit for reporting and publishing it. But looking over the list of winning articles, I'm struck by what's missing. There is not a single winner that focuses on President Joe Biden's cognitive decline. In fact, there's not a single article about the Biden presidency at all among the winners. Was it not one of the biggest stories of 2024, however, that the sitting president could only take meetings in the middle part of the day, would have trouble focusing if he had to talk for too long, needed instructions on where specifically to walk when visiting unfamiliar territory, and despite all that, was still running for re-election? Nobody did any journalism on that front that was worth reporting, that was worth awarding. Now you could read this fact two ways, of course. The Pulitzer Prize Board perhaps was overlooking good reporting on Biden's cognitive decline because of its own bias, or perhaps there wasn't enough good journalism on this subject for the board to evaluate because everybody ignored it. Neither thought is particularly comforting to me. Now, I know I've really harped on this point lately. Maybe you're all getting sick of hearing about it, but it seems worth repeating to me over and over again. Joe Biden, who had the most important job in the world, and was seeking the American public's endorsement to continue in this job for another 4 years, was too old, too frail, mentally unfit for the job. His inner circle participated in a vast conspiracy to cover up this truth. There's really never been anything quite like it in American history since, I guess, FDR's confinement to a wheelchair was kept a secret by his officials and also, in that case, the press. It's kind of a story that I would have thought today's scoop-seeking, intensely negative media would be dying to get their hands on, but they abjectly failed to cover it, with a few exceptions. So here we are. There's no coverage worthy of a Pulitzer on this front. Now, I wasn't exactly comforted by these comments from prize administrator Marjorie Miller, who says that critics of the mainstream media are attempting to silence journalists and prevent them from doing their jobs. Watch this.
These are particularly difficult times for the media and publishers in the United States, atop years of severe financial pressures and layoffs, amid the dangers of covering wars and natural disasters. Journalists and writers now face additional threats in the form of legal harassment, the banning of books, and attacks on their work and legitimacy.
It's true that the current president is going to war with the media, and he should not be suing or regulating mainstream news organizations. Not all criticism is a form of censorship, however. When conservatives and libertarians criticize the press for how they cover certain stories or for missing other stories altogether, we're not trying to make the mainstream media disappear. We are encouraging them to do their jobs better. By all means, I hope mainstream news organizations keep covering Trump and covering him negatively when it's called for. I've been unsparing in my criticisms of Trump's economic plans lately. I'm not asking for journalists to go easy on Trump. I'm asking for them to not go easy on Biden, or whichever Democrat is on deck, because realistically the Biden era is thankfully over. That's the way mainstream media can earn back the trust of all Americans. Or, as the saying goes, keep playing stupid games and winning stupid prizes.
That's one of my favorite sayings. It doesn't apply here at all, but I like it.
Yeah, they're not stupid prizes, and there's good journalism done, but
no, I
searched. First I Control F Biden name, no Biden. Okay, then I read every single one, nothing.
So you know how these go, right? These are subjective people who are esteemed in their careers combing through thousands of submissions. So I think that it's not about there being a lack of stories. I think it's more about none of them actually being Pulitzer Prize worthy. And we have to differentiate. It's okay that some of the reporting that I saw on CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, especially around that July area, after we saw what was different than his press team was telling us, that he was healthy and fine. We saw with our eyes, but we also cannot judge based on looks if somebody can lead. We have to go based off what their cognitive ability is. And then we watched that debate and we understood it way more. And that's when you saw a lot more reporting. But just because they didn't win the prize doesn't mean that it wasn't fair and accurate and covering what information journalists had at the moment.
But how is it the case that they weren't able to get better information earlier? Journalists have sources embedded in the administration. You can read, yesterday, for instance, we covered some of the turmoil in John Fetterman's office. I thought a lot of it was unfair, but this is reporting from a mainstream news source, interviews with former staffers about what's going on. Again, I thought it was kind of unfair, but they're able to get information about, looks at what's going on in offices in Washington, and they didn't do that for Biden.
But
until we all knew.
But even like yesterday's reporting on Fetterman, does that deserve a Pulitzer Prize? Like, even if they had done that, I think people were just trying to follow the election cycle. There was a lot going on. So the things that did win were like the beautiful photos that we saw when Trump resiliently made it out of that assassination attempt for the New York Times.
That was great work. They deserved that.
They deserved this.
I'm not saying the
reporting
winners
on international, horrendous situations in Sudan. So I think when you just level the playing field and say what was actually in the article, okay, Biden was old. Right? Yeah. He passed the torch to Kamala. But did he do something so egregious?
Well, after they forced him to.
Well, and you talk about...
he did not go gently into that good night.
Right, so Biden's team calculated or miscalculated a major mistake on my end. Like you said, you could be balanced in the way you look at it. I think they could have handled that way better, right? And gave either Kamala a good runway or made the decision years in advance to not run again.
I'm just thrown that we didn't get better reporting on how bad Biden had gotten earlier, prior to it being exposed for everyone at the debate. And then the other thing I wanted to mention here about the Pulitzers, I am seeing, while most of the journalists who won, I think did pretty good work, conservatives are picking at one of the winners, which was on abortion-related restrictions and how they had contributed this was what was reported contributed to someone's death. I saw a lot of conservatives saying that was not a fair characterization of that story. Hoping to get someone on the show who can maybe speak to that perspective, and we'll find out more about it because this is not my area of interest. But that was the other thing I saw criticized about the Pulitzers.
And always with awards, remember, like even though it might be judged by some esteemed colleagues in journalism, it still is subjective. It's not just, it's about opinion based on what they consider the highest standards of reporting or went in more detail. And so it's never going to be like, just all people agree this was literally the best reporting of the year. There was so much to cover in pictures and in writing. So I think it's hard.
It is subjective, but again, there's not a single story about, was it not a big story of last year? I still can't get over it. Maybe I'm the only one this obsessed with how Biden was preparing to be president for another 4 years.
But if they were all stories about how well Biden was doing or how bad Trump was doing, like barely any of the stories talked about the nuanced details about some of the things Trump was saying and doing that were a bit outrageous on the campaign trail, right? So it's not like we got a bunch of stories that were quote unquote biased.
Oh, but you don't think in the 2026 awards there's going to be any awards for anti-Trump stories from his first year in office?
I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball.
I can predict the future, Lindsay. I'm reading my crystal ball. I predict there will in fact be some anti-Trump reporting winning awards, and again, they might very well deserve them. I'm not enthusiastic about everything this administration is doing. It's not that you got to go softer on Trump. You just got to go just as hard against the other guys. And our perception, my perception as a libertarian, a contrarian, the right of center perspective is that they didn't go as hard because they worried that they would help bring about Trump returning to office. And now Trump's in office anyway, and nobody trusts the mainstream media.
Well, I'm going to have to check in 2026 because we can't predict the future, so we'll just see.
We'll
but
see.
Trump does have a one-way ticket out of America and a cash offer for illegal migrants. But how many are going to take it? That's next.
The Trump administration is offering a one-way ticket out of the U.S. for illegal migrants. Self-deport for dollars.
Migrants will get a $1,000 flight or they'll get $1,000 and a flight home if they choose this option.
DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said in a statement on Monday, "If you're here illegally, self-deportation is the best, safest, and most cost-effective way to leave the United States to avoid arrest." The logic behind this move is that, according to DHS numbers, it does cost around $17,000 to detain and deport an undocumented immigrant. Meanwhile, the self-deportation project would only cost $4,500, according to Fox News' Bill Malugin. DHS told Fox News that those who self-deport would be eligible to return in the future if they do it legally.
DHS says they've already paid one illegal migrant to fly back to Honduras from Chicago. Senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, Aaron Reinel Melchick, sounded the alarm on Blue Sky, writing, quote, "In a wildly deceptive claim, they say this will allow people to come back illegally. For many people, this is a lie. Leaving will make their cases much worse."
Meanwhile, podcaster Tim Pool wrote on X, "Well, this could cause a perverse incentive. LOL, hopefully it works, though." What are your thoughts?
So I just want to get this straight. The same party that said every single dollar spent on a migrant is a dollar too much wants to cut a $1,000 check with Trump's signature on it, like those COVID checks,
Well,
and
it
pass
saves
them out
money.
to these same migrants. That's what we're saying, correct?
Yeah, but it saves money because it's more cost effective than having some police interaction and detaining them. So I'm glad it's saving money. I don't have that problem with it. My issue is I think it's probably unrealistic to expect a lot of self-deportation, and especially as we're trying to prioritize deportations, we want to deport, or there's a maximum public consensus on deporting people engaged in gang activity or other crimes. I think those are going to be the least likely people to opt to do this because they're not going to be like, "Oh yeah, I'm an illegal immigrant. Here's my check. I'll go now." Like, they're not going to do that. They don't want to be on the radar, right? Because they're involved in other criminal activity. So we're going to get like the most polite, compliant of the illegal immigrant class are going to agree to do this. What is that accomplishing?
So, I live in Denver, Colorado, which is a quote-unquote sanctuary city. And under our mayor, who I've talked to, and several migrants that I've sat with in interviews, what I understand is that people are fleeing extreme terror situations. They're fleeing livelihoods that they can't sustain. They're fleeing extreme dire situations where they want to protect their families. And so when they come here, it's life or death for them. I mean, they're crossing treacherous miles and miles of water, risking their lives on the journey just to get here. And although there are proper channels to come here legally, I think it's important to understand that no one's going to go back, for the most part, to that same dire situation, like, for example, in Venezuela, for $1,000, even the most good Samaritan of the bunch, because his heart is with his family and he wants to protect and save them, which is why they all came here in the first place.
Right. A Venezuelan dissident who came here because Venezuela's authoritarian socialist government, shut down their small business and, jailed their family members, is not going to take a self-deportation flight back to Venezuela. I think a better idea in this same family of ideas would be to just have them pay, and my friend Daniel DiMartino, who's a immigration expert that we've had on Rising a couple times, has a plan along these lines. I believe, I can't remember what his exact dollar figure is, but basically have illegal immigrants pay for citizenship. Instead of receiving money, have them pay the government a hefty fine in order to have a path to citizenship. That would be a lot more realistic.
For rich people at $5 million a pop.
Which I'm totally in support of. I want to drain the rest of the world of their rich people. Everyone who's a computer genius, like a tech genius, or who is wealthy, who is good looking, should be brought to America, and the rest of the world can have the backward, uneducated, authoritarian people all in China or whatever. That's my foreign policy.
I also want to make sure we touch base on the claims that Trump's team is making, that this is going to save us, from $17,000+ to $4,500 per migrant.
Well,
accepts this offer.
I'm happy about the savings.
Well, I just don't accept that, right? So the theatrics that were put on to do these large-scale migration efforts, illegal migration capture efforts, right, cost way more money than that. We're talking about chartering flights. They cost at least $8,500 an hour on a low end. And then if you have somebody high risk, remember he's going after all the criminals, those are about 25 grand, I believe, a pop, or 27,000 an hour. And so we're talking about pennies that he say he's saving and all this stuff. No, he spent so much, and he only captured 140,000 migrants to date. A far cry from the millions.
Like a lot, though.
A far cry from the millions he promised on the campaign trail. So also, this seems like a little bit of scrambling and coming up with anything, throwing pasta at the wall to meet this quota of even 1 million migrants that he said he was going to have sent back home. Because 140,000 is not close to a million.
Well, if you remove the 140,000 most dangerous or gang-affiliated migrants from the streets, then that would be a massive win for public safety.
But those people were not, though. Those people were not 140,000. We have no proof of those being 140,000 people that were criminals.
My point is that it matters who you target, and your policies should be designed, in my view, to target the illegal immigrant population that is part of the criminal element or contributes to public disorder, and that's a sizable but minority percentage of the people, and so we want a policy that is tailored to get them. I don't think this policy is tailored to get them at all. In fact, I think it's tailored to miss them wildly. It almost reminds me of gun buyback policies, which I don't think work very well either, because again, you have the responsible people who's like, oh yeah, I don't need my weapon, and you have criminals still holding on to them. So then we just end up taking away weapons from people who will use them responsibly and who might rationally want them for self-defense, and it just doesn't work.
And not a great idea. Also, you know that if people leave that came here illegally from Honduras and go back and try to come back legally, they're going to have multiple challenges. Don't sell this dream. Like, at least just tell them, hey, we're paying you to get out of here permanently.
Well, there is probably that issue too. Maybe that's what Tim Pool is alluding to. You get on the flight, you take your check, you go back to Honduras, sneak back into the country, you get your check again, you go back again. I'm not saying it's that easy to get in, or that necessarily people would do that, but people have channels to get into the country. This is all a long way of saying we need a rational immigration policy that includes border security so that we don't have our borders overwhelmed by refugees and migrants and that kind of thing, but that allows for people to come here and we can vet them and make sure they don't have criminal associations or gang associations. If they have those, they go right back. We don't want any of that. But are safe for communities and are going to be hard workers and contribute to the health of the country and get jobs and be net contributors to the welfare state, not taking out of it, and have immigration reform that facilitates that happening. That's what I would support. I think that's what Trump supports. I think that's what most of the American people support. But it requires Congress to do something, so we'll never have it ever.
And also the chance of people getting that $1,000 check when they get in another country is probably slim to none. So go.
Got to get it in different denomination.
Yeah.
Coming up, Escape from Alcatraz will be more than a Hollywood movie if Trump gets his way. Will the island prison be reopening? Find out next. The Rock may soon be back in business, and I'm not talking about Dwayne Johnson. President Trump said in a post on Truth Social he is directing the Bureau of Prisons, DOJ, FBI, and Homeland Security to rebuild Alcatraz Island.
So the notorious Supermax Federal Penitentiary last held prisoners in 1963, but it was closed due to crumbling infrastructure and high costs. President Trump says he wants to use a rebuild prison to house, quote, America's most violent offenders.
Our country needs law and order. Alcatraz is, I would say, the ultimate. Nobody's ever escaped from Alcatraz, and just represented something strong having to do with law and order. We need law and order in this country.
Republicans seem to be jumping on board. Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullins applauded the idea on Fox News Monday.
I'm all about it. And when we want to, start talking about criminals being punished, I don't believe in keeping them comfortable. I want them to regret the crime that they have committed. Well, let's have Riker and let's have Alcatraz both open. So we've got the East Coast and the West Coast both covered, and put our most notorious criminals in both of them.
Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, however, is saying it's a non-starter. She said, quote, Pelosi represents part of that San Francisco that houses Alcatraz, and she said this, quote, on X, Alcatraz closed as a federal penitentiary more than 60 years ago. It's now a very popular national park and major tourist attraction. The president's proposal is not a serious one.
Yes, it is a historical landmark now, which I think is the difficulty. I mean, I guess it could be remade into a prison complex. That sounds kind of expensive. I have been to San Francisco. I saw it from the city. You can look out into
You didn't
the
want to spend your
waters and see it.
vacation at jail?
I Googled like, can you get a tour of it? But I didn't do it. But I saw it from afar, and I guess I'm just not for necessarily winding the clock back on this one and making it a prison complex instead of a historic landmark. If we need more prison space, this doesn't seem like the most efficient or like cost-effective way to build more prison space. I don't want prisons to be cramped for the prisoners. Unlike Senator Mullins, I don't want prison to be suffering. It's not about revenge. It's about public safety, and there are some people who can no longer be out and about in society and have committed crimes and need to be kept behind bars to keep the rest of us safe. I think of it more as a safety function than a punitive,
chamber.
well, certainly than a torture chamber. I don't think that Alcatraz was necessarily a torture chamber. The reason it was it's impossible to escape from. The waters around Alcatraz the current is very strong, and I guess it's virtually impossible to escape from. Maybe you could have like a balloon or something. I don't know, a long pole vault. But
I agree. There were no known escapes, and it was a very functional prison when it was working. 60 years ago, it was shark-infested waters on top of the waves surrounding it, so nobody was escaping.
Yeah.
But I think, like Nancy Pelosi was saying, this is not realistic. There's no running water. There's no working pipes. It would cost millions of dollars to fix
You could
it.
build all those things, but it would cost a lot of money.
Right.
So.
What's the strategy here? Also, it revenues $60 million, which we're trying to bring in money for San Francisco every single year, and probably some federal funding there as well. So I think that's like all stuff that you're going to take away to then put a ton of money that we're trying to cut the budget to rebuild Alcatraz that no one called for. So it just kind of like saying things that are not being allocated properly that make no sense and don't fall in line with what DOJ was trying to accomplish. Is this the most efficient way to cut government spending, reopening Alcatraz? I would just
It's also
kind of
near
confused.
a giant city. Like there's so much of the interior of the country that is just empty land where not a lot of people live, that's sparsely populated.
Right.
Like why don't where it's easier to build, more cost effective. If we need more prisons, I don't know why we wouldn't just put them there.
Right. Also, when Alcatraz was open, I was reading yesterday that it cost 3 times more than most prisons in the U.S. to house the prisoners there for some reason, maybe because of all the...
hotels in San Francisco cost 3 times more than they do anywhere else.
Because all of Google works there. Huh? Yeah, so I think it's just a little bit unrealistic. And as much as I think people who are criminals deserve to be brought to justice and go to jail, I don't know why this is called for right now. Again, a lot of the stuff that's thrown out by Trump, I try to take him at his word, try to hear what he's saying about what he plans to do.
No, I appreciate that you're not a hair on fire liberal, shrieking hysterically about it, but this does not seem like a serious suggestion to me either.
That's what I'm saying, and I think that people, the blind allegiance part bothers me. Like when you see people go on Fox or come on News Nation and say, yes, this is a great idea, like tell me why exactly. Explain, besides you want to get in good graces with Trump. Say something real.
Right, even Trump, as he was defending, he's like, it's just kind of like a reminder of our time when we were serious about law and order. Like for him even, it's a vibe more than a serious plan. He wants to be associated with the vibe of law and order. Exactly. Republicans are, I think, smartly associating themselves with that. There is too much crime and disorder in our society. Many cities suffered crime spikes as a result of the pandemic or happening alongside the pandemic and for other reasons. A lot of disorder that is not good. Those are criminal justice problems that we have in D.C. D.C. is a horrible crime problem. It's gotten better in the last 2 years. Before that, it was really bad. Part of it is, I think, a lack of police resources. I say that even as a libertarian who is so hesitant to allocate more funding to government for really any reason. It is clear we have a police shortage and we have some jurisdictional problems and other things. So I am open to addressing, even if we got to pay more money for it, crime problems throughout the country. I don't know that reopening Alcatraz to prisoners is going to be the best idea there.
I agree. The law and order thing has always worked for Republicans, so they should keep going. Does Israel have plans to flatten Gaza? Expert Trita Parsi explains. That's next.
Israel has approved plans for a massive attack on Gaza if no hostage or ceasefire deal is reached by mid-May, when President Trump is set to visit the Middle East. Israel's security cabinet, greenlit a new plan on Sunday that entails a massive ground operation to reoccupy all of Gaza and remove the remaining 2 million Palestinians to the south.
Tens of thousands of IDF reservists have been approved to deploy in the large-scale invasion. The escalation comes after Israel ended a ceasefire with Hamas mid-March.
Joining us now to unpack the latest in the Israel-Hamas war is Dr. Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome back to Rising.
Thanks for having me.
So, a plan to attack Gaza on a massive scale, and of course some bombings of Gaza continue on a very, very frequent basis. But what needs to happen to avert this extremely serious escalation of the conflict there?
It's a very good question. I think bottom line is, if you listen carefully to what the Israelis are doing and actually what they're also saying, there is little in terms of the release of the hostages would change this plan. Smotrich has already gone out and clearly said that they're going to retake Gaza, annex it, that this is part of a longer plan that has been in the making for quite some time. So the only thing that ultimately actually can change this is not necessarily that the Hamas would release the hostages, etc. That offer is on the table for all of them to be released in return for an end to the war. But Netanyahu does not want to end the war. He wants to annex Gaza and then go on to the West Bank. The only thing that can really change this is if the U.S. changes its position. We saw earlier on that the Trump administration actually was willing to put pressure on Israel, use American leverage to secure a ceasefire. But since then, we have by and large seen an abandonment of that approach. And the Trump administration is essentially falling into the same pattern as we saw with the Biden administration, which is to essentially go along with what the Israelis want to do here. And the long-term consequences for the U.S.'s own national security, as well as the short-term consequences, are quite severe, because we have now seen once again that this conflict is internationalizing with the Houthi attacks on Israel, including their ability to actually get a single missile through all of the air defenses of Israel, including the American THAAD system.
Now, Trita, you've been really critical of unconditional support for Israel from the U.S., but if this comes at a cost of humanitarian norms or violating those or international law, so what would be some next steps that would make sense for the U.S. or the Trump administration in this particular situation with an ally?
Well, first of all, the United States is the country that has enabled this to go forward because of the providing the Israelis with all the weaponry. The Israelis could not have sustained this for this long. In fact, they couldn't have sustained this for many months had it not been for this steady provision of weapons and ammunition coming from the United States. And again, the Trump administration, in my view, needs to look at this from a U.S. national interest perspective. And recognize the significant damage this is doing to the U.S., not just in terms of American reputation, not just in terms of the manner in which the U.S. is now widely disrespected around the region as a whole. This is the lowest point for the U.S. since the Iraq War, but also mindful of the escalation risk in which the U.S. can get dragged into another war. And Yemen is now a very clear piece of evidence of this. And let me just paint a fuller picture. When the Iranians shot about 300 or so missiles at Israel in return for the Israeli assassination and exchange of fire earlier on between the two sides, they got probably around 20 to 30 or so missiles through. In order to get through the Israeli air defenses, as well as the systems that the U.S. had put in place in support of Israel, they needed to swarm the Israeli air defenses in order to get 10% or so of the missiles through. Now you have an incident in which the Houthis used a much more advanced missile. They did not swarm the Israeli or the American air defenses. They shot a single one. And since then, the United States has actually put its most advanced anti-air missile defense system in Israel. And even that wasn't sufficient. What does this mean then? This means that the vulnerability, not just on the Israeli side, but also on the American side, is much greater than was previously thought if this escalates into a full-scale war, in which they don't have to shoot hundreds of missiles and swarm the air defense systems in order to get missiles through. They can do so with a single missile. So the risk and the cost in blood and treasure for the United States, if this escalates, is greater than what was previously thought, given the technology that the Houthis now have. And this then raises the question again, what is the US national interest in all of this that justifies the slaughter in Gaza, this unconditional support for Israel, including this risk of getting the US dragged into war? And I could not find a single argument as to why this was worthwhile from a US national interest perspective during the time of Biden, and certainly nothing has changed during the time of Trump either.
Something is maybe changing within the Trump administration in terms of the defense policy. We've been covering all of these, this turmoil, turnover in terms of who's working there in the Pentagon. It seems like some of the more anti-interventionist voices within the administration have been displaced as a result of leaking and leak investigations. Mike Waltz, obviously, though, was out of his job, but now it's being characterized as a promotion, stepping into a different job. Do you have any insights into which direction the Trump administration is leaning in terms of a more interventionist foreign policy with respect to Israel or Iran, or a less interventionist policy that's actually, in line with what Trump and J.D. Vance said they wanted to do and ran on?
Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize one thing, though, is that the three Pentagon officials that were fired ostensibly because of accusations of leaking, there has been no evidence provided that they actually leaked anything. In fact, the investigation against them seems to have been dropped. This seems to have been about something far different than any actual legitimate concerns about them leaking. But you're quite right that the picture is rather mixed. On the one hand, you have seen some anti-interventionists, people who are actually pursuing what Trump promised that he would do when he was seeking election, have been ousted. But on the other hand, you also have seen now that Waltz has been fired, even though, of course, he's been replaced at the UN. Bottom line is that this is a massive, massive demotion. And Yemen actually appears to have been one element of this, in which this promise that he and others in the administration had been providing, that this is a strong thing for the United States to do, to show the Iranians that Trump is serious, that there is a serious military component and willingness to use force if the Iranians don't comply, etc. We're seeing that it's really backfiring. The Houthis are not stopping to shoot at ships. All of those objectives that were supposed to be achieved, none of them have been achieved. Instead, the Houthis have counter-escalated. There is an exit. There is an off-ramp of all of this, and that is that the Houthis have said that they will cease attacking U.S. ships if the U.S. ceases attacking the Houthis. Trump should take that win and exit out of this escalatory cycle that, frankly, Waltz put him on, and Waltz perhaps also did so precisely because he wanted to see a larger war, because he wanted to see confrontation with Iran. And since Trump has now fired him, he should also fire the policy that he put in place, which was to get us on this escalatory trajectory.
Dr. Parsi, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next up on Rising is right-wing media on the rise. We'll discuss. Stay with us. Apparently things are going really, really well for right-wing media. Axios released a report detailing all of its recent wins. Its iSpot data that Axios obtained shows Fox News gained 160 new advertisers between November 2024 and April 2025. Now, in December, the outlet reported that the Daily Wire's valuation was higher than $1 billion. Truth Social, Rumble, Newsmax are publicly trading on values higher than $2 billion, which is more than their actual 2024 revenues. Some other highlights for conservative media include Tucker Carlson raising $15 million for his media company in 2023. The Washington Reporter, a relatively new outlet catering to conservatives on the Hill, raised over $1 million for its launch. Megyn Kelly announced in March she was launching her own podcast network.
Meanwhile, Trump has been in a tense legal battle with legacy media outlets, as we talked about often. Trump banned the AP from the White House press pool over the outlet not using, quote, Gulf of America in their news copy. Trump also filed a lawsuit against 60 Minutes in October. He says the outlet deceptively edited their then presidential candidate Kamala Harris' answers to make her look better. Most recently, Trump signed an executive order to end federal funding for NPR and PBS.
It's good times to be conservative in media.
I was like, looking
I
at
guess.
these numbers, like the actual value of the company is not.
I don't know what I'm doing in this mainstream media. Just kidding. Very happy to be here, obviously.
So I think that there was a time in politics where, things came about. Fox News came about, MSNBC came about in the late 90s, and I think that was a surge in like two sides. And then we started to see people didn't know how to maybe differentiate between analysis and actual news reporting. But what I think that Trump is doing is not about fairness to actual organizations like NPR, like AP. These are news reporting organizations. And yes, people get it wrong. We talked about this before. But I don't think that means that he needs to kick legacy media out, constantly sue legacy media. It is a good sign that there's more voices in the room. I'm always a fan of more voices. But I think we need to be clear about which ones are actually just people in their living room with good followings and opinions, and people who actually took the time to read a story and understand a policy and have a real thoughtful discussion about it and analysis behind it.
Look, here's what I think the situation is. This is a right-of-center country. Trump just won the popular vote.
Fair and
More
square.
Trump voters than Kamala voters. There are a lot of conservatives in this country that runs the gamut from hardcore MAGA, I'm not saying that's everybody, to just slightly right-of-center or independent thinking. But this is a massive market of people that has been underserved by mainstream media, liberal media, moving increasingly and explicitly in a leftward progressive cultural direction in the last 20 years or so. That created an opportunity for Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro and Fox News, for Fox News to become even more dominating than it was previously. That's because people want to hear a right-leaning perspective that got increasingly shut out of CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times. The New York Times has 4 conservative opinion columnists. 3 of them have very similar anti-Trump. They're anti-Trump Republicans. There's very few anti-Trump Republicans in the entire country. They all have jobs at the New York Times, right? There's one of the 4 you can say is kind of somewhat positively disposed toward Trump, although I don't know whether he's a Trump voter either. That is the kind of representation the mainstream media has given to conservatives, a false representation, a representation that doesn't actually represent them. And so there was this tremendous opportunity for people like the people I just mentioned to speak to an audience and attract advertisers and subscribers and make money. And also Trump has just won the vibe shift for right now. The vibes are very right-leaning. Even places that were not explicitly conservative or political, like Joe Rogan, for instance, have become more associated with a kind of right-wing cultural experience. Not even in terms of the hard politics, but it's just where it coincides with younger, especially male voters moving to the right. Again, in just a cultural vibes-based sense. It's not like they're suddenly really into the conservative tax policy, whatever the conservative tax policy is.
But I think
that's what's happened.
I think with free press, you have to be really specific. Like Trump it's not that people are reporting negatively on Trump to constantly bash him all day. He's actually doing some outrageous things, right? So like the handling of the pandemic. Looking back, historians are never going to say that was handled well by a president, and he showed extreme leadership. I mean, that's my opinion, but I'm just saying I don't know that will be the case. When we talk about some of the
Joe
things
Biden handled it well,
but I'm saying those criticisms came about, but also for Trump, and Trump just gets mad when people criticize him. That's not free press. Like you're going to have bad press, and he's done and said things that are a little bit intense and extreme for our historical politician. And so people have reported on it with an unprecedented set of information and rules on their hand that basically all rules are broken. Like he doesn't follow any set of traditional norms that we've had in government for the longest. Like how do you report on a story of him posting what Catholics feel are mocking them yesterday, posting an AI picture of him as the Pope? Like he's doing things that nobody has any experience with. And so he's getting mad that the coverage is not like, wow, this was so funny and cool. This was so great, so smart. He's getting mad that the coverage of tariffs is not like, these are a great idea. These are all things that are jarring people in the world. I mean, he's shaking up. Every policy decision is shaking things up in a way that's unprecedented.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous disagreement over some of those. I mean, if another pandemic happened tomorrow, I would be relieved that Republicans are in charge, not Democrats.
Oh, man.
Democrats would lock us all in our homes and force us to wear masks and keep our children out of schools and forcibly vaccinate everyone. Meanwhile, Trump masterminded Operation Warp Speed to make the vaccine available for anyone who wants to take it as quickly as possible. That was good, and that was enough. And Democrats had a zero COVID lust that would keep us trapped inside forever.
You don't agree that he criticizes everyone that doesn't have a favorable view of him. So, for example,
He absolutely does that, yes.
Yes, exactly. So Fox News.
Yes. He criticizes Fox News.
He criticized them most recently because their poll said he wasn't doing a good job.
Right.
That pollster is the worst. Like, this is a man who's leading our country and also telling us that the news, he coined pretty much fake news. He's making people intentionally not believe trustworthy outlets like 60 Minutes, like suing ABC. Like, yes, for
trustworthy?
sure. Trustworthy because 60 Minutes does in-depth reporting. He's trying to make the American public, or at least those people who feel left out, feel like it's all lies. And those are two separate conversations.
Well, so then when you say all lies, yeah, then you lose me. I don't think it's all lies. I think, or maybe, and lies is not even the right word. I think it is ideologically driven and advances an agenda that I don't subscribe to, and is sometimes quite wrong or misses important stories and is biased in some way. Yes, all lies is too strong. That is a fair criticism of Trump. Trump exaggerates. Trump routinely, turns the dial up to 11 in his thunderous condemnation of anyone who looked at him wrong. Do I think that is correct or even good, politics or strategy? No, but we kind of all know that about Trump by now. Like, if that is a bridge too far, the fact that he exaggerates his criticisms of the media or other people, yeah, you're not going to be a Trump supporter. It's just not. It's not going to happen. He's not fixing that. That's who he is. But that doesn't mean that. That doesn't mean there isn't a tremendous that people. There are other aspects of Trumpism that a whole lot of Americans, the majority of Americans, like and wanted, and they felt underserved by what Democrats and the mainstream media were offering, and that also the mainstream media became synonymous with the Democratic Party, right? We could go back to a time where the media wasn't so, or it didn't have the perception of being, so much on one side or the other. Now all of our elite institutions feel like they're lined up against conservatives, the GOP, Trump, etc.
The scary thing is that Trump might say things in jest or might say big ideas that he doesn't plan on following through, but he actually has the power to try to follow through. So he tried to throw AP out of the press room. He could try to technically ban New York Times and every journalist that would criticize him because he doesn't like the criticism. So the same person that doesn't want any bad reporting about him is the same person that tried to test the limits of his power to throw people out of fair reporting on the overall presidency. And as I said, people do
Joe
get
Biden
it
didn't have
wrong.
to do this because no one was daring to do bad reporting on his side. I mean, that's the difference. There was no one even trying to do bad reporting.
Plenty of reporting. We can debate this all day. There was plenty of reporting on Joe Biden. I think people did not know. And when people figured it out, there is still to this day articles this week about Joe Biden covering up his decline and his team.
Well,
now we know.
We had this discussion in my radar as well today. You should check that out if you missed it. Up next, a lab experimentation on beagles has been ended after 40 years. I'm grateful. We'll talk about it. Stay tuned. PETA and conservatives are finding themselves unusual allies in the fight against animal testing at the National Institutes of Health, and now they have a reason to celebrate.
The last of several experimentation labs that have been accused of brutally experimenting and killing thousands of beagles for nearly half a century has been closed. That's according to the National Institute of Health Director Jay Bhattacharya, who announced Monday that the agency closed the last in-house beagle laboratory on the NIH campus.
We got rid of all the beagle experiments on the NIH campus. So we've put forward a policy to replace animals in research with other technological advances, AI and other tools that actually translate better to human health.
This comes after a recent report from the White Coat Waste Project detailed the lab's history of alleged mistreatment. That mistreatment reportedly included injecting pneumonia-causing bacteria into more than 2,000 beagles' lungs, bleeding them out, forcing the dogs into septic shock for these deadly experiments.
PETA reportedly sent Dr. Bhattacharya flowers after he made the announcement, but now many conservative voices in Congress are pointing the finger at NIH Director Anthony Fauci for starting the labs in the first place. The House Oversight Committee posting on X, quote, "Oversight exposed Dr. Fauci's NIH-funded Beagle torture lab in February. Fauci's cruelty lost. The Beagles won."
In South Carolina, Representative Nancy Mace said, quote, "We've been calling out NIH's Beagle torture labs for years. Dr. Fauci spent your money to send puppies to slaughter." So this is a story that first came to my attention when I was hosting this show with Ryan Grimm, who was an animal humanist kind of thinker on the left, and was calling lots of attention to the horrific treatment of these animals, beagles, dogs, by this lab that was backed by Dr. Fauci. So conservatives, have not, I think, historically been so interested or as interested in animal welfare, although there are plenty of conservatives that like their pets and don't think dogs should be experimented on, who became more interested in this story when Fauci became politically salient and became so hated by conservatives. And so there's this alliance now of animal welfare liberals and anti-Fauci conservatives to have Dr. Bhattacharya, who is well liked by both of our factions, take action to stop this. So I'm very glad to hear about this development. Look, I am not such a bleeding heart person that I think there can be no experimentation on animals if it is in the interest of human, if it's absolutely necessary for some, life-saving technology to be invented. I still don't really want to do it on dogs. Dogs are very sentient, beloved man's best friend. But maybe there's some experimentation that has to be done. But as Dr. Bhattacharya was saying, it is not necessary. It's going to be increasingly unnecessary with AI and other technological developments to do this kind of research.
I was so excited to talk about all the activism and bipartisanship that we're seeing here just by getting this lab closed. But leave it up to the critics on the right to find a reason to pin Dr. Fauci with the Democratic Party and say...
It's not unfair, though. He is really...
I know, but we
agree. He is a chief advocate of this.
We agree that both Democrats and Republicans came together and activists to make sure that animals are treated humanely. And I think as far as we've progressed in society is as far as our technology should come, especially when it comes around health testing, especially after COVID and all the reports that have come out about animal testing there and how this started, now on the back end of COVID. I think there's a lot of questions and conversations around it that both parties can agree that they made some wrong steps on and some oversight that they weren't looking at on. And I think that that's an important conversation. And the bigger thing is bipartisanship. That's the point of government. I think we've gotten too far away from that people don't even know how to work together, and we're ineffective, probably the most ineffective Congress
Well, I'm happy to have
in years.
Anti-Fauci bipartisanship. I'm happy to have.
Fauci, listen, sometimes a leader needs to just be vocal and coach you through tough moments, right? It doesn't always mean that you have to get everything right, but keep calm and carry on is a saying for a reason. And I think Fauci was available so much that he helped us keep calm and carry on through something that no one had any experience with in our lifetime.
That's not even why I dislike him. I dislike him for probably causing the pandemic in the first place, right? I mean, he's the foremost public advocate of the exact scientific research that our Energy Department and our FBI and our CIA now believes was the cause of COVID. He was the chief promoter of continuing to do dangerous, reckless, gain-of-function experiments. In fact, when the Obama administration ordered the NIH to stop doing these experiments, except in extreme cases, or you could have some national security exception, Dr. Fauci was the one who personally signed off on continuing to do these experiments in Wuhan, China, where it originates from. So while I disagree with his mask guidance or his social distancing guidance, fine, that's just disagreement. It goes a step beyond it when the more we learn that COVID probably, not certainly, we haven't definitively proved it, we don't know, that COVID likely originated under circumstances he himself designed. That, to me, puts it beyond just an academic disagreement over what we should have done and into criminal negligence and should be investigated, but Biden pardoned him, so we can't look into that.
Well, some way to look at people who do jobs like Dr. Fauci, which is a large job that he held for years before we knew him as the one associated with the Democratic Party now, Dr.
Well, he
Fauci.
doesn't. That's them. He doesn't have
Right,
to
he
be. So
doesn't- well,
Democratic
I mean,
Party is
that's
claiming him as one of their own. They don't have to do that. I'm
Just
not
because
forcing them.
I think that people feel that he did a decent job at keeping us calm, as I was saying. But for doing a job this long, you know, this is someone who is in a total different field, right? We're up here as journalists, as analysts. He's literally trying to find the cures and information about some of the world's wildest information and diseases. And if you think that he made a misstep in some way, that's definitely worth a conversation. And maybe worth a Pulitzer.
Millions died
No,
because he
but-
was like, we have to make this virus more lethal and more contagious, and find out what happens.
No,
That's
simplify-
crazy. That's
an easy
that's like
way-
Dr. Frankenstein level hubris.
So you think that he had this master plan to take down the United States with COVID?
No, I don't think
is
it's
what you're
deliberate.
saying?
I'm
Because
not
this is
saying
a
it was deliberate.
conspiracy theory now.
Never said it was deliberate. Never said it was deliberate. I think scientists engage in reckless experimentation that they knew and that safety experts had warned them could get us all killed, and they did it anyway because they didn't want to be told no. I think that's what happened.
We need to get Dr. Fauci on the show.
One other
to defend himself.
had him on years ago, and it did not go well. One other point I wanted to raise, going back to the dog experiments before we move on. I've always found this interesting, and COVID made this more salient in my mind. So you can do experiments, lab experiments on animals. It's been allowed. But you can't do experiments on people even with their permission. Like this emerged during COVID, right?
Right.
Like how can we get a vaccine as possible for those who want to take it? Well, they had to, make sure it's safe. Well, you could, with people's consent, if someone says, I'm a healthy young person with a low risk of a negative COVID outcome, give me the vaccine, deliberately expose me to COVID, pay me, and we'll learn how the vaccine works. You can't do that. It is medically unethical, and you're not allowed to do that under scientific guidelines. But human beings can consent to things. Animals cannot consent. Animals don't have free will. They can't. So we create a system where it's okay to experiment on the thing that cannot consent, but it is not okay to experiment on people with their willing permission. That seems hypocritical to me.
I guess if the overall goal is to preserve human civilization and also, the world that we live in, which comes with a ton of things, nature, animals, I think that human preservation and policy that we have in place generally protects humans first. And so I think that that's probably why. How do we figure this out without testing on something? And I'm
not saying
ethics
unwilling
concern.
people.
It's
Well,
ethics.
yeah, but I think
concern.
medical ethics have gone insane. I believe in an ethics of consent. I would never do something to an unwilling person, obviously. But if you consent, then it's really none of the government's business.
So you want them to get rid of that rule versus stop testing on animals? You think that they should just allow people?
I think it's hypocritical to test on animals and say it is always unethical to test on humans even with their permission, because animals cannot give consent to be tested on because they lack free will. They're not human beings.
You're going to have to go argue this one before Congress.
I guess so. Up next, a woman who hurled a racist slur has now raised $500,000 on Give, Send, Go. You've probably heard about this case if you paid attention to social media. We'll discuss it up next. If you spend any time on X, you're probably aware of a woman named Shiloh Hendrix. In case you aren't, Hendrix has gone viral for allegedly calling a child a racist slur at a playground. The child is black, she's white.
On top of that, she has raised now $500,000 on Give, Send, Go. A local chapter of the NAACP, a human rights group, started a fundraiser of their own for the child victim and his family. They've raised $320,000 so far.
There's another similar situation tied into this. In April, a black teenager named Carmelo Anthony was charged with first-degree murder for allegedly stabbing a white 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a track meet. Anthony has also raised over $515,000, which sparked outrage among the right.
The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh seems to be at the center of the discourse now over a recent video he released. Here's what he had to say.
Every race can and should defend and root for their own, but white people, and white people only, should not be conscious of their race at all. None of it is fair or morally coherent. And the Carmelo Anthony case, where a black teen raked in $500,000 as a reward for stabbing a white kid to death, was, for a lot of people, the final straw.
Political analyst Rob Smith wrote on X, Black racist crowdfunded for Carmelo Anthony. White racist crowdfunded for Shiloh Hendrix. Both are wrong. Please touch grass. Visit the real world where blacks and whites and Latinos and Asians and everyone else aren't in some imaginary race war. So this is a very incendiary topic that's getting a lot of attention on social media. I think we laid it out pretty well there, but in case anyone's confused, this was a playground encounter. I have not seen video footage of the actual alleged slur being, it was the N-word being hurled at this kid. I don't know if that footage does exist. A bystander starts recording after that,
right,
when the woman is leaving. Now, she says that the kid was going through her stuff, was like going to steal something from her, and so then that's how she responded. And then this is a different person who is not related to or parent of the kid, who just happens to be there recording, and she has an interaction with him. So, so then she started a GoFundMe type campaign. That's what this website she's using is. People gave her a lot of money, which sounds crazy. Conservatives are responding saying, well, while that is bad for people to give money to someone for uttering a racial slur, well, here's this other situation where people were giving money to this black teenager who stabbed, allegedly, this white guy. My thoughts are that everyone involved in this has done a bad thing. I mean, it is the kid, however old he is, should not have been going through someone else's belongings, so that was bad. The woman should not have reacted the way she did. That was bad. The bystander should not have been recording her. That was bad. We're way too much of a surveillance society now, where every time you see, every negative interaction between people now has to be broadcasted onto social media. Sometimes you're having a bad day and you're rude to the cash register person or the person who takes your parking spot.
Rude and racist are two different things, but go ahead.
Fair enough, and I'll absolutely let you jump in just a minute there. But I think that was bad. I think the recording is bad. I think her starting a GoFundMe was bad. I think people giving her money is bad. I think it's all bad, and it should just not be encouraged in any way, shape, or form. Conservatives are saying, well, we agree with that. That's what Matt Walsh is saying. I agree with that, but as long as you're going to donate to people for this reason, then you got to be prepared for this reality too, hoping that this is the end of it and there's no more of this kind of thing afterward. Sorry, your thoughts.
No, I actually think what Matt Walsh is saying is ridiculous, because you're taking a recent incident that's naturally in the news because there's recorded viral video and trying to combine it with a past incident, when I feel that both are wrong. Mm-hmm. Don't raise money for a wrongdoing, right? In both situations, people should have found somebody who was actually in an authority position. This woman, Shiloh, and a park ranger, maybe the parents of the child, and in the Carmelo situation, an adult in the school, a mental health supervisor in the school if they felt like they were being bullied. There's a bunch of conversations, but I think let's just start here, that we're rewarding racism from this woman, Shiloh Hendrix, for $600,000. Mm-hmm. It means that, harassing and, not tolerating black children in America is now not only a tolerance thing, but now it's a lucrative thing to do. And I think that has to be a hard line. This was bad, mm-hmm. and not try to find the what if-isms to figure out how to bring these together. Because what we know is that historically, right, if a white woman in this country wants to call the cops or create a situation that will make a black person uncomfortable or make a cop uncomfortable, they could be risking their lives. I mean, we have several examples of this, like when George Zimmerman, who was a Latino man, decided that a black young boy looked uncomfortable in a neighborhood, he took the liberty to kill Trayvon Martin. And so he no longer is alive, right? When we go back to 1955, you have Emmett Till, a white woman called and said that she said that he was somebody who was dangerous, and he is no longer alive. We have in the park, in Central Park during COVID, a call saying that a bird watcher was a threat, and the police were called on that man who was just relaxing. And we know that these situations can lead to death.
No, you're right.
And so this is a 5-year-old, and even if he's not 5, because the argument Matt Walsh was making is that he could be 6, he could be 7, he could be 10. He's not 30, 40, or 50 like an adult. And what I think that she needed to do is find an adult to speak to. That man that recorded her was a friend. He was the child who had autism, allegedly, was friends with his children, and he was protecting him. I have a child. If you were watching, your friends probably have children. If you're watching their kids or around their kids, you're probably going to be like, hey, don't talk to them like that. And from what I saw,
But don't steal my stuff.
I know, steal your stuff. What she had in her hand and was waving around, and we're going to find out from research from this Minnesota Police Department. But what she had was a yogurt pouch. A kid with autism goes in your bag and takes a yogurt pouch. Are they a robber or are they a kid with autism? This is what
all have autism.
No, this is
getting a
what
little
this is
silly.
actually you don't know if he has autism or not.
I don't
So
care
we're gonna
either way.
but you know an autistic kid taking something is not stealing, right? They're literally just pulling stuff like
Well, I'm not-
I have autistic people in my family. So I think that
I'm not calling for him to have any kind of law enforcement action. That's, like, I agree with a
she
lot of what you
berated
said.
and chased around a child like an adult.
But she didn't call the cops.
No, she was on the phone with somebody trying to pretend like she was, so using that privilege to try to threaten somebody. And she chased a kid around calling him the N-word, allegedly, and berated him. And I think as the adult in the situation, that is pathetic. And I think that while I don't think that we need to chase her down, find her address, post it online, and many of the things that have been done, I certainly don't think $1 should go to supporting her in any
I
way.
agree with that.
And it's abhorrent for anybody that would donate to something like that.
I agree with that, but I mean, as you just noted, you were saying harassment is wrong and all that kind of thing. She has now herself received death threats across the board. Has to move, has to do all of that.
Allegedly has
so
to
that's
move, or just
well,
collecting the cash.
she is now the subject of an intense. Again, social media is not well calibrated to deliver the correct level of opprobrium for yes, she did a bad thing. No disagreement there. Does she deserve to have her life completely ruined because of it? I don't think so. I would say the same to the kid. The kid did a bad thing, does not deserve to have any kind of law enforcement. It deserves nothing more than hey, this is why you don't do that, and now you get time out or something, right?
But I think
There's
you just peeled back the layers on how she responded was like racist. It wasn't like she responded to a young kid that could be anywhere, let's say in Matt Walsh's opinion, between 5 and 10 years old. I mean, or he could be a tall 5-year-old like the man is saying.
I don't know how old the kid is. I also don't know exactly what she said to the kid because we haven't seen that video footage.
But berating a kid and chasing them around the park to tell them you're taking the yogurt or whatever is in a diper bag for a small baby.
And you're there and you're like, I'm going to start recording this?
Yeah, because I need to show the parents to tell them what happened.
Spectator of, I think there's just way too much. We have bad moments. People are captured in their ugliness, and that is now preserved forever because of the power of smartphones and social media. And I think it's not good. I think if we had been recorded, you and I, when we were younger people, our whole lives, our worst, our lowest moments, preserved for all posterity, for the entire world to pick us apart, I think it would be very unhealthy. I think we would be shocked by how badly we acted when we were adolescents.
But I
now,
think
this is an adult woman, so I'm not trying to let her off the hook.
So this is an adult woman, and I think, what's important is that, like, for example, her or Amy Cooper, who I was talking about in Central Park, who called the police. Like,
I remember
these
this
are
one.
women I don't know what job this woman has. Shiloh will find out. But with Amy Cooper, she was in a management role where she would hire people of color, and she has inherent racism in her, right? So this woman is a school teacher, or anyone that handles a black child that feels that they are the N-word if they do something childlike, take something they're not supposed to. That to me is a wild. That's a wild perspective to have as an adult.
The Birdwatcher one was a little. The Birdwatcher one was it was more complicated. I mean, she didn't use a racial slur.
I know. She just was like, "Oh my God, I'm in fear for my life." Right. So, but my point is, this woman used a racial slur.
But she called the cops. The thing she did that was very wrong is she did call the cops.
Right. They both.
She had her life. By the way, she had her life destroyed because of this. She lost her job immediately and became the most, the face of Karen, the most hated woman on the planet. So was that, the right thing that should happen?
I think if MAGA is an overcorrection of what was going wrong with policies and news always covering Trump in a negative light, then I think that, correction in this way of protecting black people and making sure that people that are Karens and weaponize the police to protect themselves and kill black people is the same overcorrection. And while the pendulum could swing, I certainly think there's room for correction in this.
Yeah, I don't want to sic the police. You should be very hesitant to involve the police in any kind of social situation unless there is a real, they have better things to do with their time. And yes, when you bring in the police, there's always the chance of escalating conflict or something. I mean, they could mistakenly shoot you. It's not as common as sometimes we make it out to be that they're all out
but
there
it's more common
accidentally
in certain
shooting
communities.
everyone. But it's somewhat more common. That's a little bit exaggerated too.
The chance of force with police officers disproportionately affect black people. But this story is kind of off tangent because she never called the police.
Well, that's
it's
because the police are
rules
called in areas of disproportionate crime and
like
lower
Central
income
Park,
where there are more likely to be Well, I don't know that there's disproportionate.
There's not. My point is that the police are called if a person that's non-black feels a threat because a black person is simply existing. And I think that should stop happening, as well as racist people being around black children.
I think there's no reason to bring race into it in that circumstance. Just don't call the police for no good reason. Don't waste their time or yours. Just deal with your little disputes on the playground like adults and move on with your lives. And that's fine. And this doesn't need to be and shouldn't be a national news story, except people are really thirsty for vengeance and for justice and for turning things into causes. And I think that's really been a bad thing. Cancel culture has been robbed a little bit of its power as Twitter, X, has become almost solely a right-wing space. There's less of the kind of, I think, progressive finger wagging that used to occur on the site. But it's still out there, and I'm always the person saying, okay, well, that thing was probably bad, but can we just not destroy people, I guess?
I want to see where this is going to go. I want to see what the police say now that they're involved, now that they're researching and trying to see what happened here with no video, or
I
maybe
don't even care. Why are they even doing that? Who cares? There's no crime was committed.
We're here already. So now
we don't need to be here. No crime was committed. Everyone stop. Just go home, play video games, do something, do some yoga. I don't know.
Okay, well, up next, Trump is taking on Hollywood. Here we go. Hollywood is Donald Trump's latest target in his tariff war. The president is threatening a 100% tariff on foreign films.
Trump posted on Truth Social on Sunday, the movie industry in America is dying a very fast death. Other countries are offering all sorts of incentives to draw our filmmakers away and studios away from the United States. Hollywood and many other areas within the USA are being devastated. I am authorizing the Department of Commerce and the United States Trade Representative to immediately begin the process of instituting a 100% tariff on any and all movies coming into our country that are produced in foreign lands. We want movies made in America again.
A White House spokesperson said on Monday, quote, although no final decisions on foreign film tariffs have been made, the administration is exploring all options to deliver on President Trump's directive to safeguard our country's national and economic security while making Hollywood great again.
Tariffs on films now.
This is like Oprah for me. Like, this is like, you get a tariff, you get a tariff, everybody gets a tariff. Like, how many?
It's breaking my heart.
And I know, I already know how you feel about tariffs, but like, what? I don't think, like, there was a piece that I read last night that Hollywood executives are actually like, wait, who does this benefit? Because like, it's supposed to allegedly benefit executives in Hollywood, and they're even confused. I mean, imagine if Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones is not shot in Iceland and Lord of the Rings not in New Zealand. Like, should we bring it to Colorado just because? Like, it's literally a green space. Trump is like harassing people that are just trying to make great art. And I do admit there are places that could bring down costs, like we saw Atlanta do, like we saw New Mexico do. And why Netflix
Atlanta has a film industry because they have a massive government state subsidy to film there that I am totally against.
Well, I'm totally for that. I think that
ridiculously bad.
Okay, but do you know why filmmakers are going overseas? Because there are, for example, in New Zealand, there are massive tax subsidies if you come film there and hire a certain amount of local crew.
Then fine.
So that's why people
Go
get
make
mad at
them there.
Dodge. So Trump actually has a point by trying to maybe bring states incentives to do this here, but trying to just tax people that do need to film overseas because they need a certain look is like absurd. And again, putting more people who've been broke for a long time because COVID and then Hollywood writer strikes, et cetera, he's bringing them even less work now.
Why can't we just, I mean, this is so, Trump on the tariffs is certainly him at his most distant from what I think the policy should be, but it just goes back to fundamental economics. Let the market decide where is the best place to film and make a movie. That the studio will decide where it's most cost effective to do that, where they can make the most profit, and that this is not a process that needs to be directed by government whatsoever. You can tip the scales and say, well, if we're going to massively subsidize it, it'll be here, or if we massively punish it, it'll be there. Why? What is the benefit that serves? Because the taxes are paid, let's say if it's a tax, if it's a subsidy, well, those are taxes paid by, and I know this because Michigan, where I'm from Detroit area, they, I think when I was in college, they moved forward with a film incentive to rival the Georgia one, because they wanted to have movies made in Michigan. But like, and again, it's not just a tax break. If it's cutting taxes, I'm all for it. They were actually, it was a subsidy. It was a direct payment, like a cash payment to make your movie here, to hire people here. And right, we all like the idea of hiring more local workers or local actors or whatever, but since it's a direct payment, the state had to raise the money from somewhere else. So they're taxing cab drivers and local businesses. They're taxing them more, taking that money and then giving it to a film studio to do a movie here. So it's not like you're reducing revenue and job opportunities in one sector of the economy in order to grow a different sector of the economy. So like, why is it more important to have the film studio instead of whatever businesses we're going to pay? Do you know what I mean?
Well,
it's just redirecting resources, saying, well, the market is directing them this way. We're going to direct them this way. It's not. It's destroying jobs here and creating jobs there. It's not a net gain of economic opportunity.
Well,
that is my critic.
It's like bringing, Trump announced the draft will be in D.C. in 2027. Like, I think bringing big events to your city, like a big filming, let's say they film Batman in Michigan or something like that, right? If they do that, then those cab drivers will have a lot more work because all the crew will be figuring out where to eat and figuring out how to get from the airport. And so even if they are taxing people, yeah, they're paying higher taxes, but throughout this time of year, your profits should go way up.
I'm
like
saying,
when
the market
a certain
directs
event is in a city, like the Taylor Swift tour, right? This is the same thing. Like,
but if you have to tax those people to put the Taylor, you're only breaking even. I mean, this is.
Well, we don't know the exact numbers for taxes versus the subsidy versus how much that actual filming will profit and put into the community.
And this goes into pretty basic economic broken windows theory. Like, if I pick up my coffee mug and smash it through the camera recording us right now, I've created a job for the camera repairman. But I've not created net economic activity because I cost this company money. So there's an opportunity for someone and a lack of an opportunity for others. I mean, this is right. I mean, you can always create work by destroying economic value. You essentially redistribute economic value somewhere else. But you don't break even when you do that.
Other cities and counties and states to film in. And I think that the incentive can happen early on. But now, like you said, Atlanta is a hot spot. And sooner or later, if Atlanta gets rid of their credits and just goes to like even less of a credit, a tax credit or a subsidy,
they're all going to move elsewhere. That's what's
No, I think that maybe people will stay there. Tyler Perry is not leaving. And then other people, you know what I mean? He owns half of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So
well, good. Then we'll find out. We'll get rid of it and we'll see.
I just think that, it's a short-term solution to figure out how people can film in the U.S. Like, there needs to be incentives that make it make more sense to not make New York in Canada, which they do on film sets, look like New York instead of filming in New York. Well, it's extremely more expensive to film in New York. So maybe don't give out a subsidy, but find a way to make filming in New York or LA or anywhere else make sense for any production that doesn't want to go bankrupt.
Funny, the fact that they film everything in Atlanta. I watched like 9 seasons of The Walking Dead, which is not a very good show, but it's filmed in.
Did you watch Talking Dead also afterwards?
I didn't watch.
Okay, thank God.
So much.
I was about to say.
It's funny because the show is about the slow, inevitable zombies. It just can't be stopped. It's like a metaphor for the show itself. It was always close to getting good. Anyway, filmed in Atlanta, but the later seasons take place in Washington, D.C., in Alexandria, of all places, in Washington, D.C., and it's just like, it's clearly not Alexandria. They're like in a jungle. It's clearly the climate of like forested, jungly Georgia. They're always sweating through their clothes. Like, it's just not Alexandria or Washington, D.C., but it's filmed there.
Sometimes you can tell.
Often you can tell. Well, it's funny whenever there's 24 shows that take place in Washington, D.C., where they attack the Capitol or the White House, and I'm always like, well, that's not where that building is relative to that metro station.
Nothing around the Capitol, just emptiness. Nothing around the White House.
There's one season of 24 where the terrorists, it's an African warlord, and they swim, I think, under the Potomac, and they dig into the White House from. It's so hilarious to watch. Wow. It's one of my favorite seasons of 24.
You're like, that's realistic.
I think it's season 7. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you back here tomorrow.